Hi, I'm Adam Luke.
Hi, I'm Judy, and we are two licensed marriage family therapists.
The SessionWell podcast was created for pre-licensed clinicians, licensed clinicians, and the everyday Joe. Perfect.
Okay.
Yeah. All right. Well, we're just going to start this podcast different because the three of us are very different therapists, and that's the way it's going to be. You heard us on the intro. My name is Adam Luke. I'm a licensed marriage and family therapist. I work in California and Tennessee, and you're listening to the SessionWell podcast. Why the heck do I care what SessionWell is? Well, SessionWell, Judy, Yen, and I put this together in the idea of, hey, we want to have a resource for pre-licensed clinicians, licensed clinicians, and the everyday Joe. Today's guest is going to be a lot of fun because we've literally spent probably 2 years trying to get the planets to align to get this woman on our podcast or us be on her podcast. There may or may not have been spiritual warfare. We'll get into this later on. But my amazing co-host is...
I'm Judy Yen. I'm also a licensed marriage family therapist, also a high school teacher, and a professor at Hope International. And so we are here today with Talia, and we are super excited because, like Adam said, it's been a long journey trying to get all three of us in the same space. All three of us are very different, but I think it makes us awesome as a group. So we're just really excited to have her.
Is it my time to shine?
Oh, it's your time to shine. Go for it.
Okay, let me get the sunshine right here. No, nobody can see me. So I just moved the blind in my office, so sun is beaming on my face. Okay. My name is Talia Bombola. I too am a licensed marriage and family therapist. Thank the Lord. It was a journey, as they say on The Bachelor. Yes. I also work as a coach. I think life coach sounds too, granola. So I just leave it at coach. My specialization is confidence and assertiveness. That's something I've done since the beginning of no matter what modality I've used. I love it. I love working with men, women, couples, teens for a while. And then during the pandemic, things shifted and a lot of people were home with their family a lot. And it was a lot. And so I had to be very intentional about who I could best serve. I love families, love working with family systems where they come in and think, oh, this is never going to change. And I'm like, oh, but it will. Yeah. Come to mama. Let's do this. And then we have sessions, and I love seeing people transform, whether it is in therapy or coaching. It's the coolest job, honestly, to have somebody come in the office or the virtual space and not believe a version of themselves can exist, and then to watch them discover it along the way. And that's in therapy or coaching. So that's like my clinical side of things. I'm an adjunct professor at San Diego Canyon College in Orange. I have a couple of podcasts. I have an e-commerce business. I have new e-courses because I'm trying to make mental health more accessible to the masses, but coming from a research basis, not just TikTok. And I don't dance. So unfortunate for you who are expecting me to dance in the videos, I do not. What else? And I have a funny Instagram page. I have a very funny meme page with a pretty big following that I think honestly skyrocketed so people could cope their way through mental health during the pandemic because everybody needed a break from reality.
Yeah, I think that was absolutely true because I was watching during like 2020 and he went from like 8,000 to 13,000 to 20,000 to like 27,000. And it's like, how's she growing it? And it's like communal trauma.
I just had to watch the world burn and take advantage of it.
Exactly.
I'm like, oh, are you sad for seasonal depression? Here's a meme. Are you happy but not for long? Here's a meme.
Yeah. And I'll have to say, at least looking at your e-course stuff, I was checking it out. She sent over a couple links. I love the fact that you're always using like GIFs in everything you do. Of like, I can do that.
Even your website.
Yeah, my website, my landing pages, and I've seen a couple other therapists use it in their email marketing. I'm like, thief, but I have no proof, obviously. It's just my own ego being like, we did this first. But I love it. I think it makes it accessible, and it is how I am in session. Like I can be very serious and pragmatic and pull from the, research and education that we all went through for multiple years and thousands of hours, or I could be a person and like include humor, which is obviously something I developed from my severe childhood trauma being bullied in middle school. But you know what? I turned it into a career. So really, who wins?
Exactly. Yeah. It's a great thing when you get to thank your haters. Thank you. Still making me better than you. That might be some of my own personal trauma as well, but we'll get to there. But
I think we all have some of that shared trauma.
Yeah, exactly.
Yes.
Yeah.
And I mean, you also segued perfect into the title for today, which is You Are Enough, a journey towards self-worth.
This is, I think, a journey we all benefit from going on. I know it's lifelong. When we think about how we view ourselves, we have to look ourselves in the mirror every morning and every evening before we go to sleep. And we start life with self-worth and self-esteem, ideally. And it can get chipped away at over life experience. It can also get built up over life experience, especially when we look at, the critical mind developing around age 8. And we go from asking why when we're little kids, because we don't know the world at all. And people usually have more patience with a 2-year-old. Why? And then we end it with, because I said so. And the kid goes, okay, and walks away. Around 8, it's no longer, okay, but why is that what you said? And then this adult child thing kind of happens. And I think that plus the middle school, childhood, adolescence, where we're going through an identity crisis, that starts to either chip away or build at it. And then we sometimes, as we know in psychology, can get arrested development, also a great show. We get frozen in those pockets of time. So we're just a bunch of adults walking around with teenage versions of ourselves in the driver's seat. And self-worth, having that all integrated and believing and truly believing you are enough. You've done the work, what's not the greatest about you that you're working through that either you did or didn't ask for. And what is the most amazing parts? What are the most amazing parts about you? And I think that journey towards self-worth is lifelong, because you go to bed every night and you have dreams and you wake up, and just because you had those dreams, you're a different person. So if you really think about it like that with self-worth, how do you fill that? How do you get that bucket full? And it's by unsubscribing from old beliefs that don't work anymore. And you get to decide who you are, right? Contrary to popular belief, it's not everybody else's opinion of you that makes you who you are. It's how you carry yourself and conduct yourself.
And sometimes the most eye-opening moments is realizing that the voices in your head are not your own. So like you talked about bullying, you also talked about other people who've had influences in your life. And sometimes what's amazing is we realize I'm actually using their voice in my own head to just sort of beat the tar out of myself. When it's like I love sitting down with a client for the first time and being like, you do realize you're the expert of yourself. And immediately watching sort of like them level up in that moment of like, no, you sit with me for 50 minutes. I'm not going to assume that I know everything about your life better than you do.
Right. It's so true. They are the expert on themselves. And I think the other day I posted something like, you're also responsible for the content that you consume and the content you put out there, not only online, but whatever you say to other people is technically content. Like it's grist for the mill. And so when people are experiencing themselves, and it's like that scene in Zootopia where the sloth is laughing at the joke and you just slowly see the sclera on his eyes just open. He's like, that light bulb moment where clients have that aha of, oh my gosh. And I love asking the question from narrative therapy, like, and where did you learn that belief? And they're like, oh shit. I'm like, oh shit. I don't know if I'm allowed to curse on this podcast. But...
Oh, absolutely. Okay. This is a cuss zone.
Cool. Yeah. But that's the moment. I'm like, oh shit. Also like the scene from Bridesmaids. I just broke a lot of shit on the way down. Just fell off the cruise ship, met a dolphin, stared into my soul. Yes. And I am that dolphin in therapy. But that's it. That is what it is. It's telling the client, like, where did you learn that? And do you still want to believe that? And it's all about autonomy. At the end of the day, I think therapists, coaches more, so I'll get to that in a second. Therapists get this not bad rap, but people have assumptions that we just either sit and listen, we give advice, or we tell them what to do. No, not any of those exclusively. And the longer you get to know a client, yes, we could advise them based on what they have shared. It's not our own advice of like, well, back in my day when I did this, and that's what delineates. Seeking out a professional who can give you advice, whether it is a coach or a therapist versus a friend or family, they're inherently biased. They would either by their own self of this worked for me, so here you go and try it, or I think I know you best, so I'm going to tell you what I think you should do in this because you're coming to me for advice. Whereas a professional is very objective because we don't know your life, but we're subjective because you are our main person and we're trying to get you the best life possible. So it's like, based on what I know and what you've told me, here's what I think you could do or would be able to do. Your choice at the end of the day. that's not how people give advice. I don't know if you've ever asked advice from either of your parents, but that's certainly not how my parents gave me advice.
No.
That inner voice was the inner critic. I'm like, oh, what if I don't do this and this and this and that? And I actually had an adult moment breakthrough. Me and my brother were talking to my parents. I was like, I'm so glad I'm a therapist. And we were saying it. And my mom was like, well, and I'm like, love you. And before you go into this, please don't be critical. Like, my brother and I were already raised with this. How do we orchestrate the world to see it this way? So I actually don't need you. If I've done the thing and I'm proud of this thing, please don't shit on it. Like, just say that you're proud of me for this. And I'm not actually asking for your feedback. I just want you to say these specific phrases. And she's like, I like this. And I'm like, was that so hard? Like, and she's like, yes. No, it's been a lifelong journey. And the whole parenting thing too, that's what I love about the work is even when we see an individual, they're part of a system. Like, nobody exists in a vacuum. And so we have to work on undoing those beliefs, and that may cost them closeness to the family, closeness to friends, how they view themselves, what career they're in. Do they even want to be in this career? They're like, oh my God, maybe my people told me to be a doctor since I was 3. And like, I didn't feel like I even had another choice. Like, it's this journey to self-worth includes so many layers.
And I like the fact that you are going to be able to bring up some conversations on the fact that you use IFS and parts work.
Yeah.
Because you're one of like 3 therapists that we've had on that do IFS and parts work. And it can be such a critical component in sort of the self-discovery process, is realizing that there are parts of you. You are not just one binary thing.
Correct. Yeah. The parts work. I know that there's some people who are more classically trained in it. And I love when I talk to people who are like, they just are like fresh out of a training and they're like, and here's the terms and here's the manual and here's the this and that. I'm like, but what about the person? I'm like, what about applying this to a real human being? It's like in the cross-cultural classes we took in grad school, they definitely need to be updated now with today's society because those books were written like the 1980s. And I'm like, that's not the correct term. No, we're not even gonna go to that chapter. Like, let's skip that one. And it's like, you have to take that information and apply it to the person. So when I think about the parts work, I also include like the light side of you and the shadow side of you. And the more you integrate the shadow side, then the easier it is for you to view yourself with self-worth as a I am enough person, because I'm not afraid of those parts of me that if somebody found those out, I would be broken, wrong, not enough. Like, I'd be found out, right?
Yeah.
So once you sit with that side of you, right? I used to never want to be seen as incompetent. And I learned that through, I hated incompetence in other people. And I'm like, why does this trigger me so much? Well, I'm very high on the conscientiousness scale of the big 5. Plus, I deeply feared being seen as incompetent. Once I sat with that part of myself and integrated it wasn't a concern anymore. I'm okay if I am seen as that, and I'm okay if I'm not seen as that. It's like using the Sedona method to welcome both sides of what you're considering until you're emotionally neutral towards it. Thus, you can integrate it and move forward. So I kind of go a little more woo-woo with the parts work and like the light and the shadow than maybe some other classically trained people who have taken that. But that's kind of what it is anyway. Everybody takes a training and puts their own flair on it. Like, nobody does adherent, I mean, maybe DBT, but rarely do people like get out the manual and just follow it page by page. Yeah.
The institution of psychology has been built on plagiarism. Let's just be honest about that. Like, well, if you cite it, you're fine. But like, no, we borrow from everyone.
Oh, especially with social media, like it's all plagiarism. People like, well, you took that from my page. I'm like, did you make it? They're like, no. And I'm like, do you know who did? I'm like, no. And I'm like, then the credit will remain unknown. Like, that's, I'm not in the business of being like, I made that. But if I did make it, then I'd be like, could you at least give me credit? Like, that seems valuable. But then in psychology, if you really look at it, I'm like, all of these, I had a client ask one time, well, what's the difference of theories? And I was like, I am so glad you asked. And I was like, they're all the same. They just use different terminology for the different things and their goals. And like the goal of the treatment is what's different. Like, I'm psychodynamic, psychoanalytic. I'm getting the advanced training in psychoanalysis, and that goal is insight. I love insight. So that's why that's laden with all of my classes and courses. And even on the memes, the captions, it's like, learn from this, like laugh from this, and then learn from this part.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So what made you want to do this specific podcast? Like, have you been seeing it in your clients, just in the world? Like, how come you are enough ended up being the one that you wanted to talk about today?
I think the previous guest that you had, Vanessa, she took my other topic. No, I've had that topic on my like speaker list when I've talked about it, and I'm like, ooh, okay, so if she covered that, which I'm like, thank goodness, because I don't think I could have fit all of those two in one podcast. I'm like, what is the other part that I know, or other piece of information that I know well, that I think others could benefit from? Because I've listened to podcasts before, and I've had like, this person doesn't seem like they really know it, or like they're not living it. And so I wanted that piece specifically to be authentic. So no matter what questions were asked or where like tangents we went down, anybody who's listening could benefit from that, because we all have the journey to self-worth inside of us.
Mm-hmm. And so what would you do with a client that just came in and was like, I don't really have it? And when you're trying to work with them, they're just like, I've never had it. Like, I still don't have it. How do I even gain it? What would you suggest to them? Or how would you work with this client?
The first session, I let them lead. So I will let them verbal diarrhea dump, whatever we colloquially call it, and I kind of piece together some narratives or some beliefs that I'm seeing, like, well, they have it here, but not here. It's like the scene in The Hangover where he's gambling and all the schematics are coming in, and it's like, that's how it feels. And I'm like, okay, there and there. And that's good information. And then what about your mom? Wonderful. Okay. Making notes, mental notes. So I don't necessarily like drop the bomb on them in the first session of like, oh, it's probably because your mom this, that, and that. Cause they would be sitting there like, either like what, or like, you touched my dark, scary place and I wasn't ready to go there.
Exactly.
So I look at it like scuba diving. Like, we're just going to get used to the snorkeling area. We're going to kind of look down, but we're not going to go anywhere yet. I make some comments, and then we slowly start to scale down to like the deeper parts of their psyche and the ocean. So in the beginning, it's really sitting with them and allowing them to feel comfortable. Because I get some clients who've never been to therapy. So if they've never been to therapy or had any analysis or anything like that, to dive right in would not even land well. Not only could it be potentially traumatizing, they wouldn't learn from it the same way as if we slowly pace them into, oh my gosh, maybe that's because of this. Yes. How does it feel to have that insight? And then eventually I'm just witnessing them analyze themselves in some ways. And then I'll add in like, well, that kind of ties into this session when you said this. Oh, you're right. So it comes from a lot of them talking and then them having insight and then us joining in that insight together. I like to say it's like, I know it and then they know it and then we know it together. So it's like a constant process each session.
So what I'm hearing from you though, is you're not the therapist that sits there and goes just like, oh, well, tell me more.
No.
Oh,
there are times I've said that, but most
of course.
How does that make you feel? Or I will preface it with like, classic therapist move here, but how does that make you feel? Right. Or like, what did you feel? And when they said that, what went on for you? I'll rephrase it to a more hip lingo. So the client's not just sitting there like, oh, really? Where's your cardigan? And I'm like shoving it down in my chair. Look away.
Exactly. You take the cozy blanket and you just drop it off the chair. Like, all of a sudden the tea kettle bleeds. Like, oh, son of a bitch.
Right? I should have shut that off, right? Are those real glasses? No.
Exactly. They're just blue light tinted glasses.
They told me I had to have these. Please leave me alone. Right?
Yeah.
Oh.
The reason why I bring that up is there's so many clients that I do sit down with that they go, oh, wow, you're not what I imagined. And I could take that many different ways. I was already telling you I look like a lumberjack and a truck driver. And so sometimes people are like, when's the therapist going to get here? And it's like, I am him. Anyways, it's my Yoda moment. So, but it's this realization that therapy actually does look different than how it's been presented in just media or in stereotyping. And truly, I believe, and I tell a lot of clients this, if you feel like you're sitting with a therapist and you don't feel like you are getting a return on your investment, you need to get up and move.
Yeah.
Like, it's going to be best for the therapist and for you, versus basically you're just going to sit there and butt heads. And so like when you talk about this journey towards self-worth, sometimes that's even the hardest part, is like, how do I plug in with a therapist? What does it look like? What do I need? Because I don't know. I've been around these relationships that may be beneficial. They may also be toxic. So how do I go out there and identify someone who's going to be safe to sit with me?
I recommend every therapist or every person who is in a healing capacity must be in their own individual healing journey. Like, please ask your therapist if they're in their own therapy. And honestly, just based on how they answer it, that'll let you know a lot. Why would I don't need therapy versus like, yeah, I just went last week and it's been going great. Any other questions? Like, how well resourced and how well integrated is your therapist is regardless of what you're going in for, especially sometimes for what you're going in for, make sure the person that you are seeing is very well integrated and ideally very well analyzed to the point that if there is something that comes up for the person who is the therapist sitting in the chair, they can go, whoa, I'm having a moment where this is bringing me back. Noted. I will deal with this in my own sessions and then right back to focus with the client versus like, and I've done this in the sense of joining with the client as an intention and intervention of like, if you're curious, you are not the only one who has been through that. That's my way of saying, yeah, I've been through the same thing, but it's not, their session is not about me. So in the beginning, if you're going to a therapist and you feel like it's about them, and then that's like I hear that most every day of like, oh yeah, and then I went to my therapist and it was awful. Like, I'm like, what? Wait, what? Like, yeah, they made it about themselves the whole time. They fell asleep in session. They were eating fast food. I'll have like a handful of almonds or yogurt. Like, it's just if you get the sense that your therapist should actually be on the couch and not the chair, that's probably not the therapist for you. Like, find somebody who has done the work and is continuing to do the work on themselves and has training in what you are hoping to work through. And you can see them as a person, but somebody who cares for you in a professional capacity. So it's really like an emotional experience or a somatic experience where you're like, this feels like a good fit. It's like going on a first date.
Yes.
Right. There's times where it's like a lot of sparks, but that's because your nervous system is telling you to run. And there's times where you're like, I kind of want to go on a second date with you. This has been pretty cool. Yeah. That's the fit to have when you're looking for a therapist, is that curiosity.
Well, do you feel like, and this is a personal question, but do you feel like you've gone on your own journey of trying to find, I am enough and your own self-worth?
Oh yeah. That started, I don't know why nobody put me in therapy earlier, given what was going on with my eyebrows in 7th grade, but that's an aside from my own parents. Yeah, it started around 11 or 12. I was also a highly anxious child. So my homework would be done even before we got home from carpool and everybody lauded me for it. And I'm like, words of affirmation, give me all of the compliments. I'm going to store them up for a rainy day. And then middle school hit and there were a lot of rainy days. Yes. And I was on like the cusp of in person, but also cyberbullying and that personal experience of like, wait, maybe I am a bad person. Like it was almost like, like the scene in Harry Potter where the Dementors kind of like suck the soul out of you. It was like being the genuinely confident, like the gifted kid. And I was in a school of a lot of gifted kids, but it just like turned like later in middle school. And it just, some of it was probably, now that I look back on it, my own perception of what was happening that fueled what was actually happening as well. So I do take accountability that I probably could have said something sooner to my parents or the administration, but I was 12 or 13. Like I didn't have that confidence or assertiveness yet. And then that slowly chipped away. And then I think in high school, I had like a huge identity crisis, probably some transgenerational wounding at the same time from like family lineage, again, knowing now, looking back, and starting in therapy when I was about 12. And that's been an ongoing journey for me. I've seen different therapists, but in some capacity, healing and that journey to self-worth has been part of my own personal life. And I think that makes it easier to go through this journey with other people. And I forget which book it was, but the quote goes something like, our ideal clients are basically versions of ourselves that we've already grown through. Like, it doesn't mean that we're only picking people of like, well, I went through this 2 years ago, so here's the advice. But if you've been through something before, you're more likely to be able to sit through it and not get activated, but also to be able to relate to it of, wow, I remember where I was at when I had that exact moment. What did I think I needed then? And what does my training tell me? Again, it's this confluence of events of, I have been through a lot, and I would go through each trauma, either that I brought on myself or external stressors brought on to me. I'm like, why the fuck am I going through this? I can guarantee you at least once every session with a new client, I'm like, I got you. Like, okay, okay, God, I see what you did there. Like coming in 10 years late, almost forgot about it. But he's like, nah. Remember that really terrible thing that you did in high school? And I'm like, yeah. Why? And he's like, because your client's gonna have it. Enter a new client. And I'm like, okay, well, we could have maybe picked a different way to do that because it's only a Monday morning, but thank you.
No, I can totally relate to that. Like, I remember, like, I don't know why I thought this, but I think when I first started my practice, everyone's like, oh, like you should serve the Asian American population. And I'm like, why? Because I'm Asian. Okay. But now, like, most of my clients are Asian. And a lot of it, as I've gone through my own journey, like self-worth and identity, it's like, oh, you have a family that shames you and is critical. I get that. Like, I understand that. And for them, and also the aspect of like being Asian and not being comfortable essentially saying anything negative about your family because it's seen as a betrayal. It's very like intertwined and like we're very like enmeshed. It's just like it's something that's like, oh, I get that. Like, but I wouldn't be able to identify that with clients unless I had already gone through that on my own. That's I don't love my parents. Like, even just saying that now, I'm like, oh gosh, I just told the world that not that the world listens to this podcast, but
yes, they do. Believe in yourself.
I know. But I basically just said that my parents, we have experienced shame and is critical, but I'm like, that's a lot of Asian families. And that's just almost kind of like
generational too.
Yeah. And so I totally understand what you're saying, but like, yeah, we've gone through our own. So then when we see a client that like sits with us, we're not as activated because it's like, okay, like I've already healed from that. And like, we're still in therapy, but it's like, hey, like I can relate to you. I feel what you're saying. And, I hope you feel safe in here.
That's where my like tagline, the you're not alone, I've been there too. It's not like a flex of like, and let me tell you how much better I am at this because of blah, blah. It's like, you are not alone. And for most of the things that I will be seeing my clients for and guiding them through feeling directionless in college, like those specific incidences, I have been there in my own way. And if you are ever curious, I am happy to answer whatever questions I'm able to. But really the base of that is you are not alone. We go through life feeling like we're so alone. And now with social media, it's like, it's almost inundating of like, oh my God, I'm not the only one. But then it's just this barrage of messages of like, well, who do I go to and how do I do this? Like, we still need trained professionals. Like Instagram and TikTok and all that are sometimes good. They do have good content and accessibility, but that's not a substitute for sitting down on the couch week after week and having somebody entirely devoted to you to help you be your best self. That is not what social media is at all.
No.
That's what therapy or coaching are.
Well, it's also talking about the fact that in one, you'll become the owner of your own life, and the other one, you become a follower, right? And so there's this big moment where everyone goes, okay, well, no, I can get that cathartic release through social media, through whatever it might be. And that cathartic release is there. I've experienced it. Trust me. I've gone to Talia's page, laughed, been like, haha, I'll just shove this one deep down. And then it comes back, right? Like it's a momentary relief. It's short-term, not long-term. And a lot of people, I think also when they step into the therapy space, sometimes you sit with a therapist that hasn't gone through these life experiences. And I'm not knocking everyone. Oh, you haven't had this massive trauma. No. Good for you that you didn't go through that. But it also gives therapists who have been in that moment, like a deeper well for empathy. Because that's the other misnomer here is that like, oh, sympathy is like empathy. No, me feeling bad for you is different than me sitting with you and saying, okay, where do we go? What would you like to do? You have not lost any value. You cannot change my unconditional positive regard for you in this moment. And so if this is one of those sessions where we're going to just take a deep breath and we're going to just hold for a second, we can do that, or we can purpose it and we can go a different direction. It's wherever you are. But it is those moments where you have these ahas internally as a therapist when you go, oh shit, that's what it was for. Those nights that I'll be honest, there was nights in middle school for me where I cried and asked God why I felt this way. Why did I have these traumas? Why was I going through what I was going through? And you're absolutely say that again.
Oh, my middle school, I'm like, why am I chubbier than all the other kids?
Exactly. And then you sit there with a client and you go, wow, I can feel that with you.
Mm-hmm.
And that sometimes
yeah.
is the beacon that provides hope in repurposing pain.
Mm-hmm.
It's
And
not,
especially with teenagers. Yeah. Because they're not going to look to their parents for like, what have they been through? And I had this like my own aha moment I think it was like 2 or 3 months ago. It had happened in like smaller form before that. It was like kind of seeds planting. And then all of a sudden I was like, oh, that's it. Like, great Scott, I've discovered it. And it was like the world that has existed for our parents no longer exists, especially with technology. Like, it's never going to exist again. They do mean well. They are trying to, I'm not going to speak for every parent, but for the well-meaning parents, they mean well. And they try their best and they're trying to give you advice, but they never got that advice. Emotions weren't a thing back then, not let alone add any culture or geographical transitions or assimilation. Like, all of that also included, they're trying to do the best that they can. But when you hear it from a parent, there's always this view, no matter how old you get, that you're your parent's child. It doesn't mean that sometimes they do treat you like a child, but if parents can be aware of how to harness that power for good instead of like, well, I'm going to control it or this, sometimes even without realizing that's what the intention is, sitting there with the client and body image, God, why is this happening? I remember this, she was sitting with this teenager one time years ago. She's like, I just feel so chubby in this. Whenever I sit down, I have like fat rolls on my stomach. And I remember like I had like a tighter shirt on and I did the same thing. I'm like, me too. And she was like, oh, what? And I'm like, yeah, and I'm way older than you and it's never going away. Like, just joking. And she was like, okay. And I'm like, that's just your skin. Like, you're gonna be okay. If you're really worried, we can talk to your doctor about health and stuff. Like, I normalized that part of it. But I was like, like doing the chubby belly thing too. And she was like, oh, okay. Right. It doesn't mean mom or dad couldn't have done that with her, but like those powerful transformative moments of like crying and being so like, and also you're feeling the pain of your frontal lobe develop and it's fucking awful. Like, I don't know who I am. I don't know who other people are. Who am I supposed to be? Okay, I'll try on this identity. No, that didn't fit. But if I don't do it, then I'm like, ugh. Right. And I don't know when it's going to come out, but I really want to write a post that's like, you're not having a quarter life crisis. You're feeling your frontal lobe fully develop and it's going to be painful. Like, critical thinking skills are now flooding in live time. And you're like, oh, maybe I don't want to be an engineer. Maybe I don't want to date this person. Maybe I'm like, why do we make people pick all these lifelong decisions when lifespans are till like 100 now? If you live till 30, great. And you went to college at 18, you really only got 10 good years left in you. Like, you don't have the whole journey to self-worth because you're going to die in your 30s. Like, humans have transcended this archaic system of like, go to school, get your prereqs, blah, blah, blah. Like, especially now with the pandemic and work from home, like, we got to catch up with the psychosocial development times because it is not the way of the past when those things were written.
Well, and you're also bringing up the point that a lot of times now, like if we look over, it's been pretty much 2 years of isolation, right? We're getting close to there. And so when we look at the fact of like, how does that affect development? And then better yet, what are the echo chambers kids are living in or just we are living in? Because I can only think of it this way. I know that we all sort of got licensed around the same time, but what blew me away was that I was able to take my licensing exam like 2 weeks before the country shut down. And I just remember going, oh my God, what would have it been like if it was 6 months later? Or like, and so you have not just therapists, but you have people in college, you have high school students that had the last 2 years of high school basically ripped away from them.
Yeah.
You know, senior year is supposed to be that thing you live for essentially. And then no proms, no winter formals, nothing like that. And where do we go from here? And how do I find self-worth when all of a sudden I'm a square on a computer?
Yeah. Ooh.
It was really hard last
fatigue,
year. I taught online, like my high school. It's so sad because we're back in person now. And literally I had 2 girls come like stop by my class. I had them online last year. And I'll be honest, last year was awful. Like it was a hybrid. It was like little boxes.
I've never seen so many ceilings in my life. I'm like, can you put they're like, no. And I'm like,
yeah, they don't want to be on camera.
Yeah.
But there was these 2 girls that came by and they were so excited. They're like, oh my gosh, hi, Miss Yen. And like, they could tell that I didn't know who they were. like, because and then they immediately were like, oh, she doesn't know who we are. Like, do you remember us? And in the past, I always remember my students, but last year
Yes.
was awful for all of us. And it was so sad because I think so many students last year felt that, because they felt unknown, unseen. I'm just another box in another class, and I'm isolated, and I can't go out. And so I think that last year was just so hard. So the topic of like, you are enough, like how did you do that during the pandemic, of people coming in and you being like, okay, well, you are enough. But every other external circumstance tells them that they're not.
I kind of adopted a method, especially in the beginning when everybody came to therapy, and I'm like, why couldn't you have done this 5 years ago? Like everybody, and sometimes literally their mother were like, I need therapy. And I welcome them. And of course, we reach our own internal capacity. But when I would sit with clients in session, the first 5 or 10 minutes is them processing how they're doing. So I didn't make the assumption that everybody was freaking out, because honestly, some of my clients thrived during the pandemic. Like it actually wasn't a problem for them. So if I had started or led with like, gosh, aren't the times so tough? And they're like, this person doesn't get me. So it's like, you set the tone and I will join you in the tone, and then we'll co-lead each other. So it was, if they were struggling with not feeling like enough or freaking out, I would join them on that end. But if they're like, oh, things are doing well, personally, my brain was like, oh, thank fuck. Like this is going better, because I had struggles for sure, but I don't think I endured as much as other people did, thank goodness. And I was able to have that mental wellness resource for like, let's talk if the people are not having a struggle, or this is actually benefiting them in some way. If they hated their job or a coworker, now they get to work from home, they're less stressed. So it could actually have a lot of positive transformation. So I met them where they were at in either direction, and then walked through, and what are you telling yourself about this? And what part of you is freaking out? Well, the part of me that doesn't want to be orphaned if your parents pass away from COVID, I get that, right? So it's like, let's join with whatever parts of you, and like invite them in the room to sit next to you on the couch, like the eclectic approach, but like experiential. Let's talk to this. Let's use a little bit of empty chair. It's like a dash of empty chair, a dash of psychoanalysis, and let's have you feel contained, even if it's just for this hour or so each week. This is a place for you to feel like you are enough. So I think it was guiding the beginnings of session, meeting them where they're at, and then going from there and honestly blessed to live in Southern California where the weather wasn't as terrible. So people were going outside and able to get vitamin D and have some exercise. And some clients, they're like, this is actually really helping my depression, or with anxiety. They're like, it feels like the whole world knows what it felt like to be me every day of my life before the pandemic, because I was constantly worried something bad would happen. And now the thing happened, and my brain's like, see, I told you, and then walks away. And you're like, what? No, come back. Anxiety, where are you? And they were like, had to create a whole new identity of not being anxious anymore, because this pandemic was like the ultimate cure of like, I told you, we have prepared for this for years. And then it just falls in the distance. And you're like, okay, but now my life is really calm. And I'm like, don't go self-sabotaging. And they're like, so I did the thing you told me not to do. And I'm like, perfect.
I love that point in the session when you sit down, you're like, well, where are we going to start today? And they're like, well, I didn't do what you said, and it was kind of crazy.
I texted my ex, and I'm like, and how did it go? They're like, I'm like, and I love you just the same. And I'm like, I love the authenticity piece of it, of just like, you are a lovable person, right? You've been through stuff that you either brought on yourself, or you've done, or somebody else brought on to you. I learned that one from my dad, because I'm big on accountability and responsibility. The more you take ownership of it, the less sometimes we do make ourselves the victim. Unpopular opinion, I'll probably catch flack for this, but I'm not talking about events that happen to us, victimization. Like the narrative you create about yourself and operate in a daily world like view, you can victimize yourself. And often people do. I'm not good enough. I'm too stupid. I'm too lazy. Says who? Not
yeah.
Probably some parent or teacher along the way. And I'm like, and what a gift it is going to be for you. And then when you prove them wrong, and then they're like, fair point.
Yeah.
Fair point.
No, I remember 4th grade, I had a teacher that told me I was stupid and I was slow and not worth teaching. And I remember just like, holy shit. Because I was so academic. My academic career was not fun because I spent most of the beginning of it in special education. And it was one of those things where people thought that I was testing poorly and I didn't have the ability to hit certain ceilings. In reality, I was bored, but I didn't know how to verbalize that.
Yep.
And so I spent first grade, second grade, and part of third grade in classes. They're like, well, we don't get it. And luckily I had a parent that was really attuned to me. And my dad was like, that's weird though. He will sit and he will take apart the lawnmower and put it back together. So I don't think he's stupid.
Yeah.
But let's find. So what my dad did was he went and bought like every mechanic magazine he could find. So dirt bike and ATV and off-road. And then he's like, he's reading it. Because he would ask me questions and I could say like, oh, well, I saw this in a magazine.
Yeah.
He's like, so you're reading it. But what was the greatest, the greatest comeback moment for me was I got picked to speak at my commencement for my master's degree. And I thanked that woman on stage, because if it wasn't for her, I would have not had the fearlessness I then possessed to like, basically, I don't care what people say about me. I don't care what people with the limitations they place on me, because I realize that I'm going to be that only one that is able to put a number to what my self-worth is and what my value is. And that's why I'm really big into repurposing pain. Dude, she wrecked 4th, 5th, and 6th grade for me. Because I thought like, oh, wow, this is the authority figure.
This is an adult telling me who I am. I ought to believe it. And parents of even other children don't realize how powerful it was. So when Judy asked, like, what was the transformation like? It was like 6th grade me. Everybody's like, be more like Talia. She's so studious, this, that. And I had trauma and people literally telling me to kill myself or spread rumors. Like I remember a voicemail one time in middle school where this girl told me to kill myself. Voicemail. Like I will never not replay that in my head. I can move through it now and go, and I'm so glad I didn't, and go get through it to repurpose the pain. But there's one time, this one parent specifically, I ended up running into her at some friend's wedding later. She and I are not really friends, but I went just because we're family friends. And she was just like, well, starting rumors and this and that, getting that invitation to that wedding brought up so much for me. Cause I was like, no, this girl was actually like my first bully, and I'm not going to be going to that or see all of these other people who for years disparaged me and judged me for what their children had done to me. But like, no. And so I remember I'm like, and I went to a lot of therapy about going to, like, the wedding was more than an event for that person. And so I remember going, and that mom specifically ran into me in the bathroom and she was like, Talia. And I was like, and just kind of like smugly looked at her and just walked out. And I'm like, I'm not giving you, and of course that's not my best showing, but I was like, all the moments came flooding back of like, no, like you may see me and think you know me, but you don't. And that's why I was just like, I'm not engaging with this. And my mom, who knew the person, was like, oh yeah, well, she's doing so well now. And you could kind of see the mom's face like, and in my head, I'm like, go fuck yourself.
Exactly.
But that's obviously like, we still have the unhealed parts of us who are inner child. Like we go in and protect. And now I'm like, I've got you, like, don't worry about it. But turning that purpose or turning that pain into purpose, it's like, I have not like, it's not only proving those people wrong that say that, like what we've all accomplished and just in and of itself is phenomenal. But given where a lot of us have come from to overcome that and then some, it's like the world's most miraculous experience to go back and be like, I proved all of those people wrong for me. I wasn't doing it for some agenda for them to finally approve of me, or like I didn't tie my self-worth to other people's approval. I was like, no, somewhere in me, I believe that's not true, and I'm going to find it. And that's where I am today now as an adult, and still learning that journey to self-worth of like, this has to be authentic to me. Like I want this to be authentic. It's self-worth. It's not other worth. It's not other people's perspective of it. We have to dig deep and find even one shred of us that believes in ourselves, go to therapy, do the deep work, and then be a whole integrated person and be able to be like, oh, that's my teenage me coming out. Oh, nope, that's my inner child. Like, what do you need right now? You're pulling on my pant leg. We're in session. I'm like, oh, noted. I will bring this up in my own analysis.
I mean, I've always felt like the greatest revenge you can have in life is living your life uninhibited by jealous and toxic people.
Yes.
Like, and so it's one of those moments again of like, either I was talking about before this podcast with you, like closing chapters in our lives.
Yes.
Why? And it's when those people can realize that in spite of them, we still became who we were.
Yep.
Like everyone who said the toxic and just demeaning bullshit to the three of us over our lives. Now here we are, 3 business owners, 3 people walking out into the ether. And helping people walk through the darkness themselves. And it's like, people go, well, why do you do what you do? And it's because I really live off that principle of there's a lot of me's out there. And I have a debt to pay back based off of the people who were able to see me when I was in the middle of my own shit and say, you're worth it.
Yep. That's my therapist for sure. And I actually, we always run into each other. She's literally in my office building now. And she was like walking out in my head. I'm like, don't go near the voice. But it wasn't her voice. I recognized it was another teen who I thought was a previous client. I'm like, fuck, I don't have the bandwidth for this tonight. Like, I'm out. It's 7:00. I'm done. And then I looked at her and she was like, and it was like this whole nonverbal moment. We've known each other so long, the whole like don't recognize the person. She like touched my shoulder. She's like, oh my God, you're here. And I'm like, I went to get a cup of water. She's like, what a small world. And we like texted about it afterwards. That's also like 15 to 17 years to plus into a relationship. So it's way different. But it was like this moment of like, she saw me. She was the voice for that inner cheerleader when my parents were going through their own stuff. And not that they didn't try, but it didn't land that way. So even if we perceive our parents failed as a parents, despite their actual textbook best efforts, in effect, they have failed because we feel failed by them. So we operate in that relationship under that premise. And so my therapist served as that inner cheerleader voice of like, she gave me an hour a week at least that I didn't want to kill myself when I was in middle school. Like that's life-saving work. And what a trip to now be like, now it's my office and I'm on the other side of that to be that voice for other people and be their inner cheerleader. And I don't know if the two of you have had that, but when clients are like, and then I heard your voice and then I said this, and I'm like, yay, I'm in their brain like forever, their psyche. And I'm like, yes, the seed has been planted.
Yes. You can't cancel me now.
Exist forever.
Yes, exactly.
Or they'll come in and they'll say like, oh my gosh, you would be so proud of me. I thought in my head when it happened, oh my gosh, Judy would be so proud of me right now. And I'm like, oh,
I am proud of you, right? That's all we want to hear. I'm proud of you. I love you. You can do this. There's nothing wrong or bad about you. You are a whole person who is inherently worthy of self-worth, and let's go find it. Like, imagine hearing that even on a daily basis, like guided meditation, honestly, in a very messed up way, because not having had that at that age made me into this career. But I'm like, gosh, I wonder how much drama I would not have had to go through if I had just believed that from a young age.
Exactly.
Or been told that. Like, it's hard though, when parents or other people around that generations weren't told it, so they didn't know how to do it. I can't fault people who weren't able to do something they were never taught to do.
Yep.
Right.
Yeah.
So what would you tell a therapist, whether it's pre-licensed, current licensed, and they don't feel like they're enough as a therapist?
I would give them a hug. Screw COVID. No, I would give them a hug if they were okay with it. And I would kind of sit down and be like, when you say that to yourself, do you really believe it? Like, they could say it to themselves, but maybe it's because they think they have to have imposter syndrome to fit in, right? There's all these like dark side paradoxes that it's like, well, I see everybody else on social media struggling, so am I struggling? No, maybe. So I would ask them if they truly believe it. And if they don't, then we pick a different narrative. And if they do, it's like, do you feel as though continuing to believe that is going to advance you to whatever goals that you have? Right. Just like very clear, like questioning, but also sitting with the emotion, letting them have the space to be like, no, I don't feel like I'm enough. And it's not as a therapist, it's usually the core person behind it that doesn't feel like enough. It's not the role. Like a therapist is a role or a job. I try to encourage people, if they've done the work, to really embody it, like to carry themselves through, not to give free therapy to their friends, but like I uphold myself as a human to the same ethical standards I would if I were in my therapy realm. So if anybody saw it, they'd be like, oh yeah, that's fine. It's not like I'm going out and getting blackout drunk on the weekends and then showing up to my office and being like, you know what, drinking is really bad for you. Like, I'm authentic and congruent in my personal and professional life in that sense.
So you're
I would
not
sit with
going to
that
be there on
therapist.
a Monday morning with sunglasses and a V8, like,
Pedialyte, like dripping my veins. I'm like, I'm
like,
fine. It's just a hydration thing. It's self-care.
I'm just
truly.
going to buzz you in today.
Yeah. Walk yourself back. Yeah. So I sit with them and I'm like, do you really believe this? And if not, let's do, like, it's a lot of like choices. Like life is a series of choices and choice points. So where did you learn that? Do you believe it? Do you want to still believe it? What would you rather believe instead? And that's what they have to tell themselves. We are a product of our own internal world. Nobody talks to you as much as you talk to yourself. And nobody is going to think about you as much as you think about yourself. So it's targeting those feelings of, if you weren't ingesting any other media, what would you believe about yourself? Like, how would you do this if there were not no one helping you, but like no one negatively influencing you? And they're like, I think I would do it this way, but I wouldn't know how to do these few things. I'm like, cool. So that's what coaching can do. Like, I would just see where they needed help. And I don't sit too far in the past. Like I obviously in analysis, we do go back to childhood and look at like what that could have an impact on. But it's being able to be like, so that's something your dad would probably say to you. And they're like, oh, like it's more rapid fire. Like, what is fueling this belief? And unfortunately, in today's society, a lot of it is, well, I talked to my other pre-licensed friend who this and that, or a licensed person messaged me and said that I shouldn't be doing what I was doing as pre-licensed. Yet, like, it's, don't believe what other people tell you about you most of the time. Like, unless you would want their life or you know they have your best interest at heart, take everything with a grain of salt. That's what I would say. Like, if you don't feel like you're enough, it doesn't necessarily mean that is true. I validate it feels true, but it doesn't mean it's absolute truth. Work through that, have your own therapist, have your own guidance, and surround yourself with like-minded people. You are the average of the 5 people you spend the most time around. If you have a shitty supervisor, if you have shitty coworkers, if you have a teacher who's telling you anything, 4th grade or above, like, take a look at who you are letting influence you, and then change as much as you can those people, or offset them at least.
I love the Freud meme that says, before you diagnose yourself with depression, make sure you're not surrounded by assholes. Like, because like you said, if you're looking at just the 5 people that are around you, are these 5 people that are in your corner? Like, because if you're basing your self-worth off of people that you wouldn't necessarily trust blindly with your life or with caring for you, then why are we allowing them to have a bullhorn to speak into your life? So, I mean, Talia, you kicked ass on this podcast. Thank you for just giving us like a little dive into this. But for people who have been listening and they want to maybe contact you, go forward, how would they find you?
So Instagram's probably the easiest to get like a sample of me. That sounds weird. I'm not a Costco product. But if you are loving Costco, unlimited samples on Instagram at Talia Bombola. And I think the link will probably be in the show notes. And then my coaching website is taliabombola.com. If you are a California resident and you'd like therapy anywhere in California, in person or telehealth, though, you will have to come to me. I do not fly. That'd be a cool business. That's therapywithtalia.com. And then my courses and classes are available through the link in my Instagram.
Yes. And that'll all be on the bottom. I would definitely recommend taking a peek at our e-courses. I just was, flirting around in there a little bit. And I was like, this is pretty cool stuff. It's nice. And it's, like you said, the accessibility is what's cool. All self-taught, go at your own pace. That is worth its weight in gold.
Oh yeah. The first series is designed to shave like at least a year off of therapy. It's all about insight. So it's discover, develop, and then deepen is the final piece. So once you get through all of that, it's all go at your own pace. You'll have a pretty good understanding of if you do or don't need therapy. Spoiler alert, everybody does, because who could not benefit from having an objective hour a week? And it makes it easier to go in and try and unpack, I learned this about myself, and I don't want to talk about this. You're like, this explains why I was feeling like shit about myself. And then I realized I'm not this, I'm just very highly conscientious, or I'm highly neurotic. So it gives you all the language that you'll need to make therapy effective for you and to suss out who is the best fit as a therapist. If they don't know those terms, which are very basic, then run, please, and call one of us, because we will be there for you.
Exactly. If you ever need referrals, reach out to the 3 of us if we aren't a good fit ourselves. Well, thank you so much for spending some time with us.
Thank you.
again, it was fun to finally put this thing in motion 2 years in the run-in. So,
Yes.
We
well,
cannot wait for you to come back.
Yes.
I have one more question.
Oh, yes.
So if they wanted to come see you, how would you differentiate between coming to see you for coaching versus therapy?
So I give the example of a tree. Anything that's deeper roots could potentially really sit in childhood for some amount of time longer. We do need a treatment plan. We might need to refer out for a psychiatrist, case consulting nutritionist, anything that might involve other mental health providers as well. Any case material that would be like that would be therapy. And then if they're very well integrated, they have the strong roots, they've already been to their own therapy, they're looking more for, hey, I'm launching this business, I need strategy. Hey, I'm having trouble giving this public speech, and it's not related to some childhood trauma. They're just like, no, I just have never liked it. Really, nothing bad happened. It's a block for me. It's more of the mindset, mentorship, and that kind of work. So if it's the deep roots, kind of building the trunk, that's more the therapy realm. And then if they're very well integrated, they just really need a professional friend or somebody who can guide them in the right direction. That's the coaching aspect.
Wonderful. Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, for everyone who's been listening in, whether you were on YouTube watching us, so yes, Talia, they will be able to see you. And then apparently she's a Kansas fan. Anyways, so thank you for spending some time with us. And as always, we will be back with another episode when we find some other awesome people. So we'll talk to you soon. Have a good day. Music in this podcast is sourced through filmmusic.io. The featured track is Energetic Upbeat by Winnie the Moob, Creative Commons license 4.0. This podcast is copyrighted by SessionWell 2021, all rights reserved. For now.
Leave meeting. Just kidding. Joke's on you guys, because I'm not doing this. No.
Yeah. Well, like, what an awesome prank, right? She took, like, I got you all up on Saturday morning to just bail on you. Best guest ever. All right. We are definitely going to edit that into the end of the podcast. So.
Please do.